This was the very first time that I witnessed in real time the impact of the work and saw that this could really grow into something meaningful beyond just Titanic as an interesting case study. So it was an unexpected thing. I didn't expect to fall into this work. It happened quite organically. But in that moment, I realized that this is really what I love doing. It's what I'm meant to be doing. And it's something that I think impacts others in a much larger way than, oh, this is an interesting narrative to tell. Because I believe that the very best stories, at their heart, they have to both entertain and serve. They leave the listener, the audience, equipped with the tools to be sharper, be more reflective, and better prepared to lead not only themselves, but their teams.
Welcome to Narratives Leadership Story Talks, where great leaders go beyond the bottom line to create lasting impact. Join hosts Jerome, Deroy, and Julienne Ryan as they uncover the stories behind real-world challenges, offering practical insights to help you lead with empathy, authenticity, and purpose. Each episode dives into how leaders use storytelling to build trust, foster connection, and inspire action. Whether you're navigating workplace dynamics, driving change, or building high-performing teams.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. I'm Jerome Deroy, CEO of Narrative.
I'm Julienne Ryan, and I am happy to be here with all of you.
Yes, it's great to see you. And before we move on to introducing our guest today, I want to remind our listeners to subscribe to the podcast. Leave a review wherever you find your podcast, because that drives the word of mouth. And also check out our YouTube channel, because that's where we post these episodes as well. And that's where you can see us in a few more dimensions. You will also be able to find today's episode notes on our website, narrative.com, narrativ.com/podcast. And those are always filled with lots of resources and advice and recommendations. You really don't want to miss that. So make sure to go to the website, and you can also find our previous episodes and an archive of more than 140 episodes at this point. So adding to our archive, I'm really delighted to welcome our guest, Kelly Skwarcan. She is a leadership consultant, speaker, a researcher, and author with a background in psychology from the University of Notre Dame. She's the author of Iron and Ice, The Full Tale of the Titanic. She's the creator of Leadership in Crisis, The Titanic, Carpathia, and Californian, a national touring interactive case study presentation adopted as advanced leadership training by naval ROTC battalions across the country. Via dynamic storytelling, Kelly equips both military and civilian leaders with the psychological insights and tools they need to navigate complexity, lead with integrity, and foster resilient, high-performing teams. Her work bridges rigorous academic theory and real-world application, earning her recognition for delivering programs that are equal parts engaging, substantive, and actionable. And I want to give a little shout out to our editor and producer, Alexandra Boyd, who's the one who made the connection. She was at a conference and witnessed Kelly's talk and told us you must absolutely invite Kelly to the podcast. So thanks, Alexandra. I know you're listening for making that connection, and a warm welcome to you, Kelly. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Jerome. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So after all that intro, I'm sure our listeners are extremely intrigued by the connection between studying the Titanic and the various ships that were there to rescue the people on the Titanic, and the things that went wrong, the things that went right, et cetera. That's all part of your study, and we're going to get into that. Before we do so, I want to ask you the question that we ask of all of our guests at the top of the show, and that is to share with us, if you would, an experience that has shaped who you are today.
I love this question. Well, there was a single moment when I realized that what I was building wasn't just about Titanic. It was really so much larger and more important than that. And that was during a presentation for all of the midshipmen of the North Carolina Piedmont Consortium down in North Carolina.
Wow.
And all of the future Naval and Marine Corps officers from Duke University, North Carolina Chapel Hill, and North Carolina State. And I just want to preface that I am confident that whenever I go to whatever school, whatever audience it may be, I know that the seeds of impact are planted. But this was the very first time that I witnessed in real time the impact of the work and saw that this could really grow into something meaningful beyond just Titanic as an interesting case study. So it was an unexpected thing. I didn't expect to fall into this work. It happened quite organically. But in that moment, I realized that this is really what I love doing. It's what I'm meant to be doing. And it's something that I think impacts others in a much larger way than, oh, this is an interesting narrative to tell. Because I believe that the very best stories, at their heart, they have to both entertain and serve. They leave the listener, the audience, equipped with the tools to be sharper, be more reflective, and better prepared to lead not only themselves, but their teams.
Yeah, Jules.
Yeah, thanks. Was there a question or having that vision of what the audience members were and who they were? Was there particular questions they were asking you that served as like catalysts and to have you thinking about that? I'm just curious about their reactions
So
when
a big part of the presentation is about personality psychology. So it necessarily requires the audience to be a bit vulnerable. We ask them to actually think about where they would fall on measures of the Big Five in Hexaco, which we'll get to later, and to share. And that can be a very vulnerable thing, especially within, certain audiences are more willing to share some of the weaknesses and strengths that they have with the whole group. But this particular group was very willing. You could tell that they had this cohesion and this rapport with one another where they were comfortable saying, hey, I'm good at this, but I'm also really weak in this area and I see it impacting the way that I'm showing up in XYZ ways. So I was very impressed with that. We were able to laugh together, and with, even though this is a very heavy topic, the story itself is heavy. Titanic is ultimately a tragedy, and the case study deals with a ship that did everything right and a ship that truly did everything wrong. So those are weighty topics, but being able to bring some brevity to that was also just a fun experience too as a presenter, that this can be enjoyable and impactful at the same time.
Yeah, and that speaks to your philosophy of how to use storytelling. There's an entertainment piece to it,
Right.
and so if
Serve
people aren't
and
really
entertain.
engaged by that, yeah, exactly, then it's harder to take in that information, I would imagine, and as we know, Jules and I, for sure. So you mentioned the two ships, and I'd love to get into the case study a little bit in terms of, because for our listeners, so full disclosure, I was telling my wife about this upcoming interview and how we met you, and of course, because I know Alexandra as well, who she has a whole documentary about. I don't know if you know this, Julienne, but she has a whole documentary about
absolutely.
the Titanic and all that. Yeah, and so anyway, so we'll. In the resources and episode notes, there will be lots of things for this episode for everyone to go and dig deeper. But I was telling my wife about you, Kelly, and this case study, and my wife is probably, well, I'm sure everybody says that of themselves, but she's a huge fan of the movie Titanic, and of course in the movie there are little glimpses of what was going on with the rescuers, but it's mostly about what's going on in the boat. And she had zero idea that there was another ship, that there were, I mean, first she had maybe an inkling, oh yeah, maybe there was a ship that rescued people at the end, but she had no idea that there was another one. I'm guessing that that's probably true of most audiences. So I'd love it if you could maybe tell us a little bit about this case study and the differences between, these two ships and what happened with these two ships, like, one not doing anything and the other one being able to rescue people.
Yes. Well, first of all, to your point, most people are totally unaware that there was another ship literally a stone's throw away from Titanic within visual range. And that's part of the power of the case study, is that Titanic itself is captivating, but then you bring something novel to it that most people are unaware of, and then you tie it to leadership, and oh my gosh, you've got something really powerful. So you're right. This is a case study about two ships, the Californian and the Carpathia. So when the Carpathia, that's the rescue ship, when they received the Titanic's distress call, they were 58 miles away and steaming in complete opposite direction. Yet her crew and captain responded with alacrity and acuity. Captain Rostron of the Carpathia, he truly did everything right, even from today's standards for a rescue operation, which is very impressive when you think about that. Before even receiving confirmation of the call, Captain Rostron reversed course. He didn't waste a moment of time. He had a small ship. He didn't know how many people he would be required to rescue. He had an old ship, one that they couldn't go much faster than about 14-ish knots. But with some very quick thinking, he was able to push that vessel faster than it had ever gone before, faster than the builders had ever even conceived as possible. And the other thing was that this ship was also needing to navigate through an ice field. So that was another part of the equation, was a physical danger to his own ship and still being responsible for his own passengers and crew. Yet he was able to think about how I can best position officers and certain parts of the ship to make sure that we're navigating safely. They dodged over 6 icebergs that night during their race to Titanic, and they did that successfully. By stark contrast, we have another vessel. This one was the one that was closer to Titanic, within visual range, and this was the Californian. Her officers watched as Titanic's distress rockets were fired one by one into the night sky. For the sake of time, I won't go into all the details, but 2 officers saw every distress rocket fired by Titanic. They informed their captain, Captain Lord, several times. He was lying down in the ship's chart room, but he did not jump to his feet and spring into action. To put it simply, he went back to sleep. He failed to even take the most basic action, which would have been to just simply awaken the ship's wireless operator, turn that on, see what was going on, and it would have been immediately apparent that Titanic was firing or was sending off distress calls, and they would have heard those immediately. So instead of doing those things, the Californian watched, motionless, as Titanic sank into the night. And later, I think this is the most frustrating part of the story. Well, I mean, it's all anguishing in its own way. But after that, investigations into Titanic's loss, Captain Lord made every attempt at a massive cover-up. For example, the ship's log, the scrap log, conveniently vanished. The formal log contained no references to any of the events that transpired, and Lord flat out faked his ship's position for the night in question, trying to make it look like he was further away. Lord also went his entire life without one word of remorse for the lives that he might have been able to save. Not one word of apology or acknowledgement that he might have, could have, or should have acted any differently that night. So that's kind of the rough outline of the 2 stories. But beyond this being a compelling case study, why does it really matter? And this is the heart of why I think this work is important, is that there's so much we can learn from it. This case study is really about a contrast between individual personalities and organizational climates. The very bottom line is that Captain Rostron's individual personality traits as a leader, he was, again, the one of the rescue ship, the successful one, his personality traits as a leader facilitated an environment in which psychological safety could thrive. As a result, his crew performed exceptionally well under pressure. And on the other hand, Captain Lord's personality profile was one which squashed any initiative his officers might have shown. His personality, both Lord and his officers, the ones on the bridge, intersected in such a way that essentially psychological safety did not exist on board. It wasn't established within the team. even for something literally as black and white as a distress rocket. And just overall personality and organizational psychology has so much to say about who makes an effective leader, how we can foster an effective team, and which conditions allow people and teams to perform at their best, especially in dynamic contexts.
Yeah. Yeah. You first of all, thanks for the context setting and the stark differences between these two ships. I mean, in some ways, for someone like you who is a researcher and looks into leadership and that kind of thing, it's a gift really to have two such contrasting leadership styles. I wonder where we would be able to find something that is so stark. So of course it makes sense to me that you would want to sink your teeth into that and look at, okay, what actually happened here. Now, you use the term psychological safety, which I would venture to say in those days probably, I don't know if that was used or not, but I would imagine it wasn't.
I don't think so.
And so it seems to be more of a recent times kind of thing.
Absolutely.
But you do emphasize that role of psychological safety and individual personality traits, and I think that really comes across in what you just presented us. But so if we put it into today's world, and you mentioned the Hexaco model, and I know there's different models that you've integrated into this. Could you tell us a little bit more about those models and what would have maybe made some people speak up who didn't speak up, or that kind of thing?
Yes, of course. So I'll start out by saying that all personality tests are not created equal. As far as academic psychology is concerned, Big Five and its close derivative. So Big Five was like the original, and then Hexaco was basically the same 5 factors, but adding on one additional trait, the H, and that's honesty, humility. Those are really the gold standard for academic psychology. And listeners may have heard of the Big Five, pretty widespread these days. It's a model of personality composed of 5 unique factors under the acronym OCEAN. And again, I could not have been a more perfect acronym for what we're doing. But that stands for openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And once again, Hexaco is basically the same 5 factors, more or less, and adding that one additional one, honesty, humility. And honesty, humility is really has been shown to be the key to establishing psychological safety within a team. And for me, what emerged as a stark operational difference between Captain Lord and Captain Rostron, and how that impacted. So if we're thinking about personality psychology at the individual level, how that influenced whether or not psychological safety could emerge as an emergent property of the team, of the group.
Gotcha. And so in terms of what were then the critical moments that, where something could have changed had these models been in place or been used? Have you looked at some of the scenarios where, okay, well, if they had done X, Y, and Z, here's what could have happened, and the outcomes would have been better?
Well, I think so much of it boils down to the way Captain Rostron's, well, I guess let's start with the Californian, the way Captain Lord's presence, so he was sleeping down below in the chart room, but his presence was still very much felt by the 2 officers watching on the bridge. Even though it's these 2 guys, they know what's going on, they know what a distress rocket is, somehow they wait 30 minutes before initially calling down to alert their captain. And I think that's the most telling thing, because in the back of their minds, they must have been thinking, oh no, well, what if we're wrong? What if we're incorrect of what this means, or what will Captain Lord think? And so you see how the way that Captain Lord led, that presence was felt, even though he wasn't physically there on the bridge, being overbearing or verbally saying something to them. It was still something that impacted whether or not his junior officers spoke up in a moment that was black and white.
That's such a great example, and I'm going to quote you on many occasions going forward, because I talk about we write scripts in our head, and then when no matter what our work situation or an interview or we're talking with somebody, it's like, who's writing the scripts? Who's casting the characters? And, why are we listening to that dialogue instead of something else? Have you really tested out all your possibilities? And that one is very much when you're been in that dominant, aggressive, negative type scenario, that is overriding. It's everything else, the common sense of like a sinking ship. What don't you get about this? The fact that they didn't want to wake him and disturb it is just astounding and understandable. I'm not judging, because it is understandable when you have those personalities.
Yeah,
absolutely. I do want to highlight a meta-analysis that was published last year, just to make this tangible for listeners, of why especially honesty, humility is this key component, and we really have to emphasize it in our own leadership and work towards it. So the meta-analysis found, so they looked at Big Five traits and Hexaco, and how that related to leadership emergence and leadership effectiveness. And just quickly, leadership emergence is an interesting construct. It's, do other people see you as a leader? And then leadership effectiveness is exactly as it sounds. So they found, no surprise here, we knew this finding, that all of the Big Five traits, with neuroticism reversed to be emotional stability, all of those traits positively correlated with leadership effectiveness. But what was really interesting and what was surprising is that the trait of honesty, humility emerged as a unique predictor able to explain leadership effectiveness over and above anything the other factors ever could. So honesty, humility in a leader literally made the difference between being effective and ineffective. And that was exactly the conclusion that we see emerge from this case study.
That's a wonderful message, I think, because to me, in order to be honest and humble, you really do. Well, there's a risk to it. I think that's a perceived risk from many leaders and just many people in general. That if I'm honest and humble here, it may not be very well received, whatever I have to say, or I'm going to have to make myself a little bit more vulnerable. And I get to this word vulnerability because that's one that we hear a lot on this podcast, and that we certainly work a lot whenever we work with our clients on, getting their stories out. And really finding those meaningful stories that you need to put in front of people so that they will trust you. That's the end goal for us, right? And I know trust is a big part of this as well. But that honesty, that humility, that it essentially says, you're going to have to be a little bit vulnerable here. You're going to have to take a risk, and for a lot of people, clearly, and especially at that time, but even today, I still see this with many people who hesitate to, say something that would be really powerful for their employees, for their customers, etc. But whether it's because of pride or because of fear of taking that risk, or something will come back to haunt them, they just don't do it. But the detriment is way higher further down the road than the benefit in the short term. The benefit in the short term is, I'm okay. I don't have to do this to myself. But of course that doesn't work on the long term. Yeah.
And
Jules.
that speaks to so many issues and stories when you talk about when things went wrong in production or in other aspects of our society that haven't been fixed. But I think when the leader has that approach, where you're talking about, Jerome, he or she sees that lack of knowledge or ability to handle everything as a lack, instead of saying, I need to learn. My group is part of the whole. And it's not that I'm diminished. It's just I have to rely on other people's competencies and expertise and insights because we're all seeing things at different levels and to bubble it up. So I think that, but again, such a good point, Jerome, and also your analogy is so compelling. Who was going to argue with that scenario of,
Right,
what
right, yeah, of
happened? Yeah.
course. Yes, that's right. Where you're talking about, where your case study, Kelly, is literally about life and death, and so many
Hmm.
lives could have been saved, and so I would imagine that's very effective when you put that in front of leaders today. So, actually, speaking about today's leaders, I'm curious about. I mentioned this word trust, and that's something that comes back for us a lot. How do we build trust? How do we create trust? And so many times when there isn't trust, things just don't work as well as they could. So I think for today's leaders, in terms of applying some of these concepts, especially when there's a breakdown in trust or communication, what is something that you say to leaders in those cases in terms of, well, we do have these breakdowns, and then you take this kind of case study, and then what happens after that?
Yes, absolutely. I love a framework. So I would offer this framework that research has found where it falls under the acronym of C, B, and I. So first, C, this stands for competence. And this is really just strictly task competence. So you say you're going to execute a certain plan, meet a certain benchmark, standard, deadline. Bottom line is, can you actually follow through on that thing? That's so important. The second, B, is benevolence. You might also call it empathy, but it's really about acting with other people's interests in mind, with your subordinates' best interests in mind, your team members, where if you were to ask them, does your leader act with you in mind? They would say, yes, absolutely. I know they make decisions with my best interests at heart. So they're putting other people before themselves in that way. And the last I, that's for integrity. You might also think about this as authenticity. Now, within the literature on integrity, it's broken down into these two component parts. The first component is that there's some type of alignment between your individual values, what you think is important, and what the organization thinks is important. So there's that congruence there. And the second part of integrity is that whatever those values are, they're externalized in some way. So they're not just lip service, they really do guide your day to day decision making, and other people see that. They witness it readily. And I also think it's important to note that so often we get trust and vulnerability, the order of operations backwards. We usually think, and it's intuitive. This is something I think that many of us were brought up to believe, that we should only be vulnerable with people we trust first. And that's
Mhm.
adaptive in some sense. But really,
Huh.
the arrow of directionality needs to go in the opposite direction. We only get trust, especially within our team, by being vulnerable in some way first, by not presenting ourselves as this infallible leader, uh, by being big enough to show that we make mistakes too, and we don't expect perfection from our team. Because we know errors of all sorts are going to happen. The real question is, as a leader, are you going to be hearing about those errors? And so we want to be able to create space within our language to spotlight our own fallibility, to give other people the permission to be open about theirs. And I think that's truly the heart of psychological safety and trust.
Yeah. Yes, yes, that's such a good point. And you mentioned this word, values, and to make sure that those aren't just lip service, and that they're seen and shared. And this really, I mean, I just had a very recent kind of connection with that, and experience where, when these values that are on a wall or in a deck or something like that, or they're in your job description on your first day, but then that's pretty much it. You never really see them again. There's nothing that shows you concretely how those values are lived, what kinds of behaviors they lead to or should lead to, and especially what kinds of behaviors are not permissible because of those values. And so it kind of gives you a structure there that's already there, and it's confounding to me that these aren't used more often in organizations. That there is, I mean, they're used because they're there, but it does feel a little bit like a checkbox, as opposed to those organizations where it's very obvious that, okay, our value of honesty is here, and we've got 5 situations that we can share with the public that are evidence of that happening, right? And so I think just wanted to reiterate that point for our listeners, because I feel like that's something that is definitely lacking in today's leadership, sort of not everywhere, but definitely you notice it when it's happening because it's not happening that often. And so I just appreciate that point. I want to get to one thing, and I'm looking at the time as well. It's going so fast because it's amazing.
So interesting.
But we're almost at the end here. But there is one last question, or next to last, that I wanted to ask, which was around hierarchy. We mentioned the ability to speak up or not speak up, and those who chose not to wake up the person, etc. But again, in today's world, what can we do in organizations to sort of make sure that, in your example, it's the gunners, right? That the ideas from the gunners don't get overlooked. The ideas from the people who are not, don't have leader in the title of their position. But, just to make sure that all those voices are heard. What are some of the things that you found or that you recommend?
Yeah, well, it's really make it actionable. I would say, we need to make sure that we're valuing individual on the floor expertise over and above someone's rank or place in the hierarchy. Because especially the people who are on the ground witnessing things, they're going to be able to see the little changes that happen, especially in a dynamic context where things are very tightly controlled. And tiny shifts can have a big impact on, or could literally lead to catastrophe. You have to get that information flowing from the floor up. And that comes back to psychological safety. So prioritizing just individual expertise, communicating to your team members that you have expertise that I don't have as a leader, and I need to hear about it. If there's something that you see, we need to escalate that so-called ambiguous threat. So being explicit over and over, not only that your input is needed, but explaining why. Because people's usual instinct is going to be to keep sensitive information or information that they're not sure is going to be received well just very close to their chest. So being explicit about that. Another thing is it comes back to being this open, humble leader, making sure that they know you're not, when they do take the psychological risk to bring something forward, it's going to be received well. And the leader themselves is not infallible. They have never done a perfect flight. They have never done a perfect pitch. That we're on the same team, and that everybody's input matters no matter their place on the hierarchy. It's received the same and treated as, no matter if you've got the pilot giving you the correct answer, the correct solution, as the study that we're referencing, the 1954 study by Torrance for the U.S. Air Force, or it's the lowest ranking person. It's about content and expertise, and it's communicated over and over.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And, I can see an alignment with, or a role, when leaders start to embrace these principles, for storytelling, for sure, right? Like the kinds of stories that are told by the leaders, and then the kinds of stories that they invite employees and staff to tell themselves, to sort of show their points of view. I certainly see that as an essential piece in terms of that communication, that consistent message that has to be given over and over again. If you can find different kinds of stories to complement that, then that message is going to stick. That's certainly what we've seen. Well, I want to thank you for going through so thoroughly this case study, and I know it's probably truncating the time that you normally have to go through these things, but you did an excellent job of synthesizing it all and making it very easy to understand, to be honest. And so I really appreciate that. And I know our listeners appreciate that. I'd love to give you the floor for whatever, wasn't covered that you really like to leave with our audience, or any resources or really anything you'd like to leave with our audience. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jerome. Well, the first step to effective leadership is self-awareness. We got to know where we're starting. Leaders just have to begin with, I think, the fundamental metacognitive knowledge of their own traits, their own personality traits, so that they can harness what they're really good at and, of course, improve the things that they might need to. Because we all have things that we need to work on, and every one of these traits is inherently going to come with its own pros and cons, its own adaptive and maladaptive sides. So I would encourage all listeners who want to improve their leadership skills to take the Hexaco personality assessment. That's HEXACO. I received zero kickback from saying that, but you could simply go to hexaco.org to take the assessment. And I think you'll find that it will truly change your leadership for the better, just from coming with it from an awareness of these traits are adaptive in some scenarios and maladaptive in others, and then choosing to show up differently with that knowledge in mind. And finally, we've said it before, Titanic is not just a compelling movie, a great case study, but I'm so passionate about using it to talk about and use it as an entry point for organizational psychology, for personality psychology, psychological safety, moral decision-making, trust, cohesion, all these things that are so relevant to today's leaders. So if you're interested in bringing my case study to your organization or team, please do reach out. I would love to work with you. You can contact me directly through my website. That's kellyskorcan.com, KELLYSKWARCAN.com, or contact me through email, kellyskorcan@gmail.com, or Instagram handles just @KellySkorcan. And I think we'll have all of those linked down below in the show notes as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we will make sure to have all of these in the show notes. And I really heartily recommend all of our listeners to check that out. And these are great resources. And as you said, some of them are not difficult to find and to go through, like the Hexaco model. And certainly really, I really encourage everyone to go to your website, Kelly, and find out more, because this is hugely invaluable and such an entertaining entry point, but also not just entertaining, but also kind of intriguing, right? To sort of, like we said at the very top, many people don't even know the existence of these two ships or what they were about, really. It's pretty rare that we focus on those. So thank you for doing this really important work and helping to get put a lens onto some issues that I think are really important in terms of psychological safety, building trust, the competence, benevolence, and was it integrity, the last one?
Yes.
There you go. I got it. CBI. I think these are, and you can remember them. You see, if I can remember them, anybody can remember them. But no, I think it really is important to just keep passing on these messages. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, Kelly, and I'm sure our listeners will be happy to learn more. We'll have lots of resources in the episode notes and links that you can go to. So I want to remind our listeners at this point that you can go to narrative.com, NARATIV.com/podcast. That's where you'll find this podcast. You'll also find it on YouTube and wherever you find podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe, because that way you don't miss any of the episodes. They'll just go directly into your feed. And also leave a review, because that creates word of mouth. And then people can find us a little bit more easily and benefit from the insights and wisdom of people like Kelly and the many others that we have interviewed at this point. I also want to remind people that if you've been inspired by this session, to please consider enrolling yourself or your team in one of our group and one-on-one coaching sessions, where we help people to find and craft the stories that really matter, and that will kind of get their leadership to the next level. We talked a little bit about that in the interview here, and how there are these, storytelling can be really an effective way to communicate some of these principles. And on that note, right now we have a special gift in the episode notes for our listeners. There's a special 25% discount just for our listeners to benefit from the partnership we have with New Mexico State University's Global Campus, where we created an on-demand, self-paced storytelling training, where again, you can learn to find, craft, and tell stories for interviews, leadership presence, and pitches. So make sure to look at all of that. And as always, we're ready to listen to you, our listeners. If there's anything you'd like to share with us, please do so. Go to our website, fill out our contact form, and that'll come right into my inbox. So I read all of the emails. Always happy to do that. So until next time, I want to thank you, Kelly, and I want to thank my co-host, Julienne, who for the time being has disappeared from our feed because of a technical issue, but I know she joins us in thanking all of our listeners and thanking you, Kelly. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jerome. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.